Taylor McLean with Real Broker and Tina Swanger with Remax Properties and leader of the Peak Success team. And this is the Team TNT Radio Podcast. Let's get into today's episode.
Taylor, what a wonderful surprise. I just met this beautiful lady, Kimberly Kruse, Christian counselor, marriage therapist. She works with tweens and teens. I am so excited about this episode so I could learn a little bit more. I have been reading a lot about different modalities, and I'm really excited to hear what specialties and things that your heart brings and your spirit-led therapies. So please welcome Kimberly Kruse.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice called Clarity Christian Counseling. I have an office up in Briargate in Colorado Springs, and I also do virtual therapy for people anywhere in Colorado. I'm also licensed in Arizona and California, so I have clients out there as well, and primarily work with tweens and teenagers as well as adult women with anxiety, depression, and who are struggling with self-harm.
The mental health field has exploded. A lot of it had to do with COVID, but I think it doesn't have the stigma it used to. People, when they say I'm going to see my therapist, they don't automatically go, what's wrong? I know my husband and I, every couple of years, we do a marriage tune-up.
Yeah, I like to see like therapy is maintenance as well as preventative. So it's not always that you have to come in because of a crisis, but just knowing that you want to do your due diligence and make sure everything's working okay, that you're thinking in healthy ways. And especially a lot of my clients, once we wrap up with the really significant therapy, will still come to see me every so often, every few months or so, or even sometimes I'll have people reach out after a year just to do a check-in. And so that's been really great to see just the stigma reverse with therapy recently.
How did you get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm the youngest of four. Actually, I have a twin sister. So the two of us were the youngest, but I'm the youngest by 2 minutes. So the ultimate youngest. And just growing up in my family, I was always the one who was just a quiet observer. So I think just very naturally, I'm always like picking up on why did that person do that thing? What happened as a result of their behavior and their choices, just even observing my siblings growing up. So that just kind of made me more lenient to the idea of therapy. So, and also growing up in a Christian home as well too, I was very blessed to have parents who they just celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary yesterday. So very healthy marriage, very good example of marriage. I know that's not always the case even within Christian homes, but I just felt like from childhood, God has always been protecting me by giving me a really healthy family. So that gave me a desire and I think skill to be able to help teach other people what does healthy relationship look like, not only with our families, but with ourselves and with the Lord as well too. So when I was finishing up high school and trying to figure out, it was just kind of a given that I would go to college afterwards. So I'm like, well, I don't really know what I want to major in. And I think it was my parents who suggested psychology. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I've always really enjoyed people and just talking to them one-on-one. So I went into that major. And then once I finished college, I was realizing you can't do a ton just with a psych degree. So I was like, I guess I got to go to grad school. So off to grad school I went. I went to Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, and got my master's in clinical psychology there. And then just started private practice pretty soon after I graduated. I was working in inpatient residential facilities as well and private practice on the side with a Christian therapist. And I think with that part, I've just always seen such a huge desire from people who are of Christian faith to have godly counsel, and then just seeing how much I think the Lord really can do when he's invited into the therapy process. He's such a huge source of coping for people. And sometimes people have these wounds from the church and they project it on the Lord. And I'm like, it's not Jesus who did this to you. This is the church, So I love it when people are actually willing and open to kind of letting God inform where their wounds are coming from and really fix that relationship. And I'm always encouraging my clients who have their faith to sow into their own personal time with the Lord and developing their intimacy with him, because I think that shapes everything so much. So yeah, that's a long answer to how I got started.
That was absolutely perfect. That was like if you were doing an elevator speech and you had 3 minutes, I think you got it spot on.
Awesome.
How did you two meet?
On Facebook.
Yeah. I don't even remember what post I did. Do you remember, Taylor? Or I think it was in our Colorado Springs Christian girls or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm always on Facebook just looking around, and there's this group. If those are listening who are interested in looking it up, it's Colorado Springs Christian Girls, and literally it's lovely. There's just a bunch of women participating in fellowship and just leaning on each other. I believe I saw your post, Kimberly, just kind of talking about what you do. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it definitely spoke to me in my heart. And I was like, oh my gosh, she seems amazing. And
Oh.
I just completely related to the post because I've actually gone through Christian counseling.
Hmm.
And my family, they've always believed in having the faith be involved in that process. And it was amazing for me, honestly, just being able to speak openly about that and
Hmm.
just having that be understood and part of the conversation, I think is extremely helpful. I had a good experience going through that, and I wanted to bring you on today because I personally have struggled with depression, anxiety, things like that. And I know a lot of other women and girls have too, because I know when I went through the depression, it lasted probably a little over 7 years. And that started when I was probably late elementary school all the way through college pretty much, and then it kind of tapered off in the middle of college. But yeah, it's something that a lot of people, especially girls, struggle with, and I felt like it definitely had a part to play as far as hormones and that
Sure.
sort of regulation when we're
Yeah.
going through puberty. And this is something no one talks about, but all young girls, I believe when I've looked it up before, I know it's a very high percentage of young girls, specifically around the age of puberty, they go through these changes mentally as well, where they're coping with these changes and their hormone levels and just that regulation. It plays a huge effect on your mental health, and a lot of young girls go through this stuff and people think something's wrong with them, but it's like it's actually we're just going through puberty, and sometimes young girls, they don't heal from it because it's not addressed in the way that it should be, maybe kind of brushed off like,
Understood.
oh, it's just a phase, she'll get over it, but
Right.
it's not a
Yeah.
phase.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing the anxiety set in so much younger and younger nowadays. And I think there's a lot of different factors with that. But definitely one thing that I do see impacting that people often glance over is just physical hormones and things like that. And so I'm always having my clients kind of check in, well, where are you in your cycle? Because that actually does play a huge role. And just that awareness sometimes can take away people's anxiety because they're like, oh no, the world's coming to an end. And they're like, wait, no, it's Tuesday. That's why, tomorrow this is coming. And that just like relieves it. It's like obviously sometimes there's still issues that you're worried about, and the hormones just impact it so much more. But just even general things like nutrition, exercise, just our basic physical needs often all start there with people who are experiencing anxiety and they're not quite sure where it's coming from. It's like, well, are you sleeping more than 4 hours a night? All the different things that really do play a huge role. So I appreciate you sharing that, just your own personal struggle as well too. And yeah, because
Yeah,
it's harder
absolutely.
to find someone who doesn't experience anxiety nowadays than someone who does. So it's very, very
Right?
common, which in a way is nice to know it's common. Other people, you're not alone in the struggle, but then there's also things that can be done about it. So just because it's normal doesn't mean it's healthy, and we just have to sit with it and accept it.
So what do you
Yeah.
find is the most helpful when somebody is really struggling? What does the first session look like?
Yeah, well, especially for tweens and teens, a lot of times it's their parents who want them to go to therapy. I'm actually seeing a huge increase in teenagers actually asking their parents, like, hey, I want to go to therapy. Usually because they have a friend who suggested it, or they've seen it more on social media, or heard people talking about their therapist, and they're recognizing, hey, I'm not okay, or I don't feel great. So I think that's actually really great when kids can advocate for themselves in that way. But a lot of times it is the parents calling and like, hey, like my child is having these issues and I need them to come talk to you. So with that, I'm always exploring before they get in there, like how open are they to therapy? So I know kind of what level of readiness they're at. So a lot of times with kids or teens, it's just trying to build rapport and connect and make them feel comfortable in this space. So,
Yeah.
and that helps them feel so much better just knowing, hey, there's someone who cares about me and who's interested in me and who's just going to listen. And I'm not going to be forced to talk about whatever problems my mom thinks are my problems like right away. Like I try to build that relationship first. So that's That's usually where I start in a first session. And it's similar, I guess, with adults. You want to find a way to connect, let them feel like they're seen and heard and like their problems matter. Because I think so much, especially with adults, they'll kind of diminish, like, this is something I shouldn't deal with. I should just be able to be stronger or handle it. So I don't know why I'm here. There's still some shame in coming in to seek help. So being able to just normalize, like, hey, like, we can't do this all on our own. We're not meant to. God created us to be in relationship and to need help. So it's actually a good thing when we come share our problems. And whenever there's isolation, that's like a breeding ground for depression and anxiety because and shame, we just like keep it all hidden. But once we just let it out and we even share that just with one other person, that brings it out into the light where God can really come in and kind of work through whatever ickiness might be there. First sessions are just rapport building and some goal setting and things like that, and kind of understanding an idea, getting an idea of what are they experiencing, what's the problem here, and then what do I think is really going on. So a lot of setup.
When you see children come in, young girls, and they are maybe in elementary school, middle school, when they're that young, how do these young girls develop anxiety and depression so early on? I'm just really curious, like what you've seen. Is it like a genetic kind of thing? What have you seen?
Sure. And I don't work with kids much younger than, I think 10 is like usually the youngest I'll take. Because if you're younger than 10, a lot of times the way they work out their anxiety is through play. So I know a great Christian play therapist, Michelle Wayman, if anyone needs that for kids under like 12 and under. But for the ones who are at that age and coming in, it really is there's a diverse range of issues why they might be feeling that. And so sometimes there is a specific traumatic event that they experienced when they were young. And a lot of times parents are aware of it, but they just need to work that out. But I think a lot of so it can be genetic. It can also be a result of environment. I do often see a correlation if parents are super anxious. A lot of times, like, they do end up passing that down to their kids. So kids are very observant. If they're watching mom freak out all the time or be really nervous or anxious or worried, sometimes they pick up on like, oh, I can't be relaxed. There's something to be scared about. So they'll also be kind of absorbing mom's anxiety. I don't think parents are ever really trying to do that, but that's what happens as well. And then there is so much correlation that we're seeing between social media and screen usage and anxiety in kids. And part of it stimulates the brain if you're on your phone all the time. And so then if you take it away, it's like their brain is addicted and they don't know how to be calm and still without having their phone or their device. So it's kind of like it's created a lot of ADHD for a lot of us, where it's like, I don't know how to be okay or how to be still because I'm used to constantly being entertained by something. So I see a lot with that. And then the comparison on social media to whatever they're seeing there. So I really think it's important to have a lot of boundaries with that and limitations or access to screens and the internet. And then a lot of it is just very general. Did you guys see Inside Out 2? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Love it. Such a good movie. I loved Inside Out 1. I think I like the second one better, especially because
Me
I
too.
work with that age group. But I also am just like, I love this. This is such a good depiction of anxiety and just for a normal 13-year-old, what they go through. And that is just a very normal stage of peer development as well. To be like, okay, I'm really concerned about what everyone else thinks about me. And I'm still figuring out who I am. And I feel insecure and uncertain. So that naturally will bring a lot of anxiety. So even if it is a natural form of development, it's still healthy for people to get some treatment or learn ways how to cope with it. I do have a lot of parents being like, I was never that anxious or stressed out when I was a kid. We just sucked it up and dealt with it. I'm like, maybe, but it is a different world. And you probably still dealt with some issues as well. So, well, it's okay, even if it's normal for kids to be anxious or for teens to be anxious, for them to still get treatment. Just like acne is normal for teenagers, and you're probably still going to get them some special face wash. Totally fine. You want to help them out with the struggles that are very normal for that stage of life.
And sometimes when you're first becoming a woman or going through puberty, a teen boy or whatever, there's a lot of changes that are going on that you want to hide. You can't talk to anybody else about, or that you're body shamed. And it helps to have a third party intervene. And a lot of times people in my generation, we didn't necessarily have those healthy guidelines. We didn't know how to talk to our kids. My parents didn't know how to talk to me about the transition or the change. So it's really helpful in that environment to be able to be in a safe space to be able to process it.
I agree. And I think with that too, like sometimes parents are, especially with like body changes and things like that, they just are too embarrassed to go talk about it. So I'm like, and then what kids do, they go to other sources to get their information. And there's just a lot of bad information on the internet. So I think for parents, just to encourage them to sit down and have awkward conversations with your kids. And it might feel uncomfortable, but the more comfortable that you make it, then they're not going to feel any shame about it and feel more if they can come talk to you. But at the same time, even if you've done a great job as a parent and you've made yourself available to your kid, kids don't want their parents to be disappointed in them or sad or anything like that. So sometimes they won't talk to you just because they don't want to hurt your feelings or to burden you. So that's where I see so much benefit in them being able to go to therapy because they don't have that fear of that reaction from the therapist. It's like, this is my person I'm supposed to unload it all to, you know? So that's, I think, so important. So for parents to even know, like, it's not because I'm doing a bad job as a mom, I didn't make my kid feel safe in talking to me. And a lot of it is sometimes in my treatment with kids is helping the parents learn how to manage their anxiety about their kid. And that also helps the parents know, hey, they're talking to someone who cares and who has clinical knowledge. And I always assure them if there's a concern, I will let you know. It's all good. But yeah, it makes sense. Like parents are going to worry about their kids because they care. That's hard.
As far as even these young girls are coming into your office and they may not completely understand what's going on, I definitely remember my parents, they would be concerned or whatnot. They're like, hey, would you like to talk to someone or whatever? And you're just like, why? Why do you want me to talk to someone? I don't
Yeah.
understand. How do you approach those situations where the young girl like doesn't really understand how they're feeling or why they're feeling that way? How do you kind of gauge that?
Yeah. And so sometimes it's helpful because parents have given me like reasons why they want their kid in therapy. So I always check with the kid, do you know why you're here? And if they don't, this is what your parents shared with me. And sometimes they're still kind of like, no, that's not the case. I'm fine, So it really depends. But a lot of them just enjoy being there to share. Like most of my kids are actually wanting to be in therapy, the ones that I see. But if they're not really able to verbalize what's going on for them, sometimes I do start with just like body sensations. Like, well, how do you feel? Like, where do you feel that physically? Do you ever get like butterflies in your stomach or any tension in your shoulders, and just really training them to start to pick up on what they're noticing and to be able to put it into words, but starting with that if they don't have the language for it. And sometimes they are actually pretty good at coming up with what emotion are they experiencing once they take time to sit and think about it. Because I think a lot of times we're not sitting there like, how do I feel? What's the word that goes with that? We just don't do that naturally. But the more I start to teach people, like, hey, like, well, let's just like check in and tune in, you probably know. And I think most of the kids I work with by the time, usually since they're at least like 11, 12 years old, they're very familiar with anxiety and what it means, and all their friends have it. So that's not often where they're just like, yeah, I have no idea how I'm feeling. But sometimes they'll just give the one word answers like, I'm good. I'm like, okay, good is not necessarily feeling. What kind of good are you? And sometimes I'll do like fun little check-in words where it's like, if you were a tree or your emotion was a tree or a plant, like what plant would you be today? Okay, tell me why. And then sometimes I'll even try to guess what emotion word it is, and just like creative ways to give them that language can be really good.
Something that I've always thought about is how depression and anxiety interact. And if there's one present, is there a higher probability that the other is present, and how they intertwine? It's just crazy how it all works together. But I'm just curious, like, you typically see one at a time, or is it kind of a hand in hand thing?
Is anxiety and depression goes hand in hand. And I think a lot of times like our anxiety or stress gets internalized. And when we internalize feelings, it usually can result in depression as well. Also, if you think about it, if I'm really anxious and stressed out during the day, that makes life not really that fun. So I'm not going to really want to wake up and jump out of bed if I feel like my day is super stressful. So then like the hopelessness and discouragement can set in as well. So a lot of times we do see that correlation. And then also looking at just the things that help with depression and anxiety, a lot of times they're similar. So getting exercise, eating healthy, getting good sleep, that can all help manage depression and anxiety because of the neurotransmitters in our brain that are produced from that as well. So it makes sense if you're not doing some of those things. If you're just sitting on your phone in your dark room, scrolling through Instagram for hours on end, then okay, I'm probably going to feel a little depressed and sad and then worried that I'll never get out of that depression. And so the anxiety builds as well.
It feels like when you're in depression or anxiety, you feel terminal for sure.
Yeah. 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 And that is a huge thing. A lot of people are hopeless that it'll ever change. Will this ever be something that I'm not going to deal with anymore? And that's where I love the Inside Out movies, because it shows how each emotion does have a purpose. So anxiety is not necessarily like a bad thing. We actually want to be able to feel anxiety because when it's acting the right way, it's like, okay, that's warning us that there's something to be worried about. And then I address it and it's gone. So I have clients sometimes who are like, yeah, my goal is to never feel anxious again. I'm like, okay, that's great, but well, probably still feel anxious at some point. So how about we just learn how to understand what our anxiety is telling us and respond accordingly? Because sometimes our anxiety does tell us the wrong thing. It's like, be anxious about this. It's like, wait a minute, there's actually not really a threat here. This is just my anxious mind as a result from certain experiences I've had in my past or how I'm looking at a situation. And if I change the perspective, then I realize I'm not as worried about it. Yes, I don't remember how I got on that tangent. Keeping it managed, there's healthy anxiety, and I think like 90% of our anxiety is actually unhealthy and unnecessary. I'm working on writing a book right now that hopefully will be out by the end of the year that kind of talks about that stuff and how to identify and understand what is my anxiety telling me, and then what do I need to do to respond in order to help keep it manageable.
Inside Out, by the way, is one of my favorite movies in the world. And the reason is because I always felt like there were different parts of me. Like there was the little girl who's stuck in the past. There's this, there's that, there's the boss lady that I am in the present. But sometimes the boss lady gets crowded out by the different parts that demand attention, whether it's the anxiety or fear or whatever. So I'm writing my book and I realize I'm 40,000 words in and I'm having to redo the whole thing, the framework of it, because I read Bessel van der Kolk's book. And I have been reading so much and trying to understand that there's different parts to all of us, things that are special. Nobody is black and white. And it is so beautiful to me. Do you have any books or stories or things that you feel very close to, similar to a book or something that you think people should read to help them understand themselves?
That's a good question. I think, let's see, in terms of like self-understanding, the books that I recommend most to clients, a lot of times are like, there's one called Attachment. So even just understanding
I read
attachment
that one.
theory. Okay, that's a good one. And then I love the Boundaries book by Henry Cloud. I think is super important because so many Christians don't know how to have good, healthy boundaries because they just want to be nice and love everyone. And it's like, no, it's actually okay to set boundaries. Boundaries are actually a form of love. So those are probably my two most recommended books. Trying to think for my own personal, so what, they're never therapy books that like really like, oh, that's my book that helped me understand, life or whatever. I think my favorite book that's probably the most impactful on my life is The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch woman during World War II who helped Jews basically out of Germany, helped to help them escape. She helped bring people into her home who were being tracked down by Nazis. And then she was actually in a concentration camp in Germany, and just a beautiful Christian woman. Her relationship with the Lord was so powerful, and just seeing like what she went through and where she was even able to see like God's hand in just like the most awful situations. And also, what I think I love most about her is there's times where she's like, I just was not feeling it. Like, I didn't want to lead Bible study in the concentration camp. So you see the humanity, because sometimes we can idolize these Christian people like they were just special in a different way because they're so spiritual. It's like, no, they're actually normal humans who said yes to God. They went through the hard stuff as well, too. So I don't know. I love her, just her perspective and relationship with the Lord. So that's probably what has shaped me a lot of times, just in my own personal walk.
I'll have to read that. And I think that definitely touches on an important point that you mentioned earlier is how, as an adult, you feel responsible to always have it together and to not struggle with the things that maybe you used to struggle with, or that maybe a child would have more of a hard time coping with. And you're like, oh, well, I shouldn't be this affected, or I should be stronger. And I love how you brought that up, because I feel like that's something a lot of adults struggle with is you're like, oh, well, no one else struggles with this. All these other adults, they all have it together and it's just me. But it's like, we're all human. We all struggle.
Yes.
And I think what you're doing, and you're just that resource to people, you're that person that people can rely on and come to. And what's really amazing is just the Christian perspective of it. It definitely brings something different to the conversation rather than just like normal counseling. That's what really helps to change lives, is being able to openly discuss your faith and how the Lord really moves in your life and can heal you, because we can't all do this by ourselves. And I don't think we should be expected to either.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That made me think of another book that I actually really do love that's kind of mental health related. It's called Victorious Emotions, and it's by Wendy Backlund. And she just talks about like her mindset basically shifting of like making sure her thoughts are in alignment with the Lord. And with that, like there's one part where she's like, I think she had a fear of public speaking and the Lord freed her from that. But she said, I had to start to believe that I could walk into a room and the Holy Spirit's so powerful, I could just say peanut butter. And that could impact people because God is that powerful to use our words. And I
Wow.
think that has kind of shifted my perspective because sometimes, like, it is a very, I feel a lot of responsibility as a therapist. These people are trusting me with like the innermost, deepest wounds of their heart. And that's not something to take lightly, but that can also sometimes create a lot of pressure on myself or like, oh no, I better say the right thing. Like, what if I don't know how to help? It's different than if I give them like the wrong food order at a restaurant or something. It's a different, well, unless they're allergic, I guess that could be dire as well too. But there's a huge, huge responsibility with that, but just trusting and knowing like, hey, God, I'm going to invite you into this therapy session with me. And I'm just going to trust that what needs to come out is going to come out. Even if I don't see the results right there in the moment, like trusting he's using that. And even if they don't experience any change for like many years into the future and I never get to know about it, trusting he's seed planting. And I remember I had one session once where they came back and told me, hey, I remember you saying this and this is what it did for me. And I was like, I can't even remember saying that. I was like, what? Like I could not remember it. And then I realized that what I said, I meant something completely different. Like I was trying to point something out for them. It was a completely different frame of mind, but they took what they needed from it. And God used that to unlock something where they needed insight when I was like, I didn't even see that thing that they were dealing with. I thought it was over here. And that's why I didn't even remember 2 months later because I'm like, oh, like it wasn't that powerful. Like I didn't think it really did anything. So that's where it just helps me know God is using what I do and say and guiding the session. It's not all on my shoulders. It's very nice.
Yeah, because something I've always believed in is trying to use prayer and just talk to God first and just allow him the time and the space to really like work through those problems first and then talk to people and try to work through whatever is going on, whatever that issue is on my heart, and not always just run to like, medication. And that's something I believe in is trying to work at something from a couple angles first before just going directly to medication, especially for children and like young women. Having a conversation, going to a Christian counselor and just building that fellowship, that relationship there with someone who they can trust and be honest with and transparent with first, just giving God the space to work and the time to really work in your life. I think that's really important to kind of take that pause rather than just rushing into the process. So, medication does amazing things. It definitely can help a lot of people and does help a lot of people. I'm not like against that at all, but just showing the value that Christian counseling can bring. It's amazing because it's bringing the faith into it and just giving God the opportunity to really have his hand in healing.
Yeah, and I think like we're body, mind, and spirit. I would like to look at all three of those areas because they all interact and impact each other as well too. So sometimes there are physical components or reasons why you might be feeling a certain way, but if it's just like, oh, just need drugs, it's like, well, are we skipping over these other areas, our emotions and our spirit, when that actually might be a bigger role as well too. And yeah, I think it's good to be cautious about what we're putting into our bodies, and especially with a brain that's not fully developed. We don't fully develop our brain until 25. Now they're saying 30. Possible you see a lot of people in like the 25, 30. It's like, okay, I don't think we're getting any smarter necessarily. But being careful about not always just turning to medication as the main form. But I do see so many clients where sometimes it is like, and I'll recommend it. Sometimes maybe you should talk to a psychiatrist because that actually might help you be able to start implementing your coping skills that we're talking about here. And so it's been a world of difference. So I'm definitely not anti-meds either.
Yeah, I love that. That kind of brings me into another question. What kind of advice do you have for women and girls who feel like coping with their anxiety and healing from anxiety, depression, those who really feel like it's truly impossible to fully heal from these things. And I've thought about this too for myself. I'm like, will I ever be completely rid of anxiety, or is this something I'm just stuck with, And you
Mm-hmm.
just feel that hopeless feeling of like, oh, I'm just going to have this forever. What is something that you could say to the audience who really feel like healing from these things and overcoming these struggles is possible?
Especially for those of us with Christian faith, we know like there's always hope in Jesus. We see him time and time again throughout the Bible being able to do what is impossible. So I'm always a huge contender, like, hey, we can still be praying for healing. And sometimes that's instantaneous, but I also see God work a lot through process. So kind of having that same with physical healing. We see sometimes God will take illnesses away from people and it's a miracle. And a lot of times we don't see that happen. So having that, I'm still going to trust in the goodness of God no matter what my struggle is, but I'm still going to believe he's a good God, and that anxiety, suffering from anxiety, is not his will for me. That's not an part of the inheritance of a daughter of God. Daughters of God get something better. So I think standing on that faith and still declaring, even when our feelings are telling us something opposite, is so important. And that's powerful spiritual warfare, I think, to do too. It's like, okay, I'm feeling really anxious and stressed out, but I'm going to declare these verses about peace and trust in the Lord. Like Satan hates it when we do that stuff. And yeah, I don't, and there's also something if he's not taking it away and we can still lean into him. So you talked about like the power of prayer and making space for God. I think a lot of us wouldn't necessarily do that if we're all like, I'm feeling great all the time. Sometimes we still do, but sometimes when there's a need, I can't go out and live my day without the Lord and first coming and grounding myself with him. That really deepens the relationship we have with him through our struggle. So I've seen him do amazing work with people through their process of struggling with anxiety, where they're so much more just like powerful prayer warriors or stronger in their faith, their intimacy with Jesus that they wouldn't have had they not dealt with anxiety. So sometimes I'm like, oh, this is just an opportunity, because I deal with it too sometimes. Like I'm feeling really anxious today. I wish it would go away, but this is an opportunity for me to choose the Lord, even when my feelings are telling me like it's hopeless.
That's very powerful.
Yeah, because another great point, anxiety, depression, the feeling of hopelessness, those aren't from God. And I think it's really hard to have perspective in that when you're in the middle of it and you're completely feeling like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can get through this. I cannot do this. And just taking a minute to realize God didn't give this to you. Like, this was not his intention. He didn't put you in this situation. It's the enemy. Good things are from God, and he wants you to have peace. He does, give us trials and tests, but it's not to make us fail. It's to make us stronger. And I think remembering that perspective of his intention, of his plan for us, it's to, what is that verse? It's like to help us prosper and not to harm you. He has plans to, you know what I mean?
Jeremiah 29:11, he has plans to give us a hope in the future, plans to prosper us, not to harm us. Like getting the
Thank
words a little
you.
wrong, but yeah.
Yes, that deserves a round of
Yeah, that's
applause.
good.
Yes, that's exactly what that reminds me of, to help us and not to harm us. And when
Mhm.
we remember that, when we're in the midst of struggle and helplessness, I think just remembering he's here with us and he's not going to leave us no matter what. Even if you forget him, or if you are angry with him, or whatever's going on, he's not going to leave you. You're stuck with
Yeah,
him.
yeah,
Whether you want him or not. He'll still love
right.
you. Hmm.
And I see so many people who deal with a lot of shame over feeling anxiety. They're like, I just must not be trusting God enough. I must be sinful, all these things. And so that actually keeps them from turning to the Lord. I'm like, no, we don't have to feel shame for that. Like emotions were given to us by God. We even see Jesus like sweat blood in the Garden of Gethsemane because he's under so much distress. So we can see like having emotions is not sin. It's asking like, well, why am I feeling this? Because sometimes it can be the result of like, oh, I have the wrong heart attitude is creating these issues. But a lot of times it's not. It might be other stuff. But even so, it's like God can inform what's going on with our anxiety. And if he's not, it's like, hey, I'm still going to cling to you, God. I know God's heart for me. When we remember God's heart for us is one full of love and compassion, and he's not like this angry, distant, like, and just clean yourself up and then come to me. Like some people, it's their view and perspective of the Lord, which has come from a lot of different reasons, or they might have good reasons why they feel that way. But I'm like, that's not an accurate perception of who God is. And that's where I really love to encourage people to dig into their own relationship with the Lord, get to know God for who he is for you personally, not just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to church on Sunday. That's a great thing to do. But if we're not taking that personal time with him, then we're missing out on so much that we have access to.
I had some church hurt growing up. So I
Mm.
didn't go to church for a long time. And then my special needs brother came into my life and I started caring for him. And he was actually the one that says, Tina, our mom used to take me to church and I was a greeter. So I ended up having to go because he can't drive himself. But anyway, that was 5 years ago and I've been going every single week. And so, I got baptized again. And so my heart got open, and just to watch him worship was, I saw God through him, and it was so beautiful. But I wanted more. And so I had to ask every day. I prayed, dear Lord, please show your face to me every day so that I can see you with me, so I know I'm not alone. And he did. He did. Every day I can see whether it's a flower or a bird. And I think I've learned gratitude, and I've learned to look.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And it stops as much of the anxiety, not all of it, but it helps.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said about learning to look, because that's something that's like sometimes even just like we can drive by a sunset and not even let it impact us. And if we take time to look and just savor it and let it in, oh, I feel so much better. I'm actually appreciating what's around me and giving space for God to even speak through that. So good. Because so many of us are on our one track, like, I just got to go get through life or whatever in this day. And we're not taking time to slow down and give God opportunity, or also just appreciating like the normal things in nature that like he's using, but aren't even necessarily like where we would say, oh, that's a God thing right there, but it's still enjoyable.
You
That's
remember
really
that old joke where there's a flood and the guy is on top of his roof and the water's rising and rising and he's praying to God, dear Lord, please come save me. Please come save me. And then a little neighbor brings a canoe by and he goes, no, Lord's coming to get me. And then and the Coast Guard comes. He goes, no, Lord's coming to get me. And then the helicopter comes. No, Lord's coming to get me. He drowns. He goes to the pearly gates and he goes, Lord, why didn't you save me? He says, I sent a canoe, I sent the Coast Guard, and the helicopter.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's hiding like right in front of us and we're just not looking for it.
I'm really curious to hear a success story, or maybe just some sort of piece of hope that we can take away from this.
So many come to mind. And I think like for some is when I've been able to work with teens, and I've had so many teens who start out like they're in therapy because they've been suicidal, and them coming to therapy and somebody's like, oh my gosh, like, can I really help them? But because it sounds like such a big deal, especially when I was an earlier therapist or a younger clinician, but where I've seen them just get so much breakthrough, and I felt like once the Holy Spirit was like, Kimberly, you have saved people's lives. I'm like, that is so weird. Wow. Like, oh, cool. Like, I'm glad, but it's just like, what? Like where therapy has actually prevented someone who probably would not be alive and has them here. So I've had sometimes the privilege of working with teens there was one recently who I worked with when he was in middle school, and now he's graduating high school and going off to college. And he had severe anxiety and depression when he started with me. And just to see now, we just do like maintenance sessions every now and then, and it's just lifted so much. And it was a process and a journey, but it's so wonderful to see like, hey, that actually made a difference. And then I've had some people call me where they're telling you how bad their anxiety is. And sometimes like you have to be careful not to absorb their anxiety. But there have been a couple where it's like, oh my gosh, like I don't know if I'm qualified enough to help, because they're like freaking out so much. And then just being able to look back even just a couple months later and be like, wow, like God has really done a huge work through that. Maybe part of it's therapy, part of it's God, where he's using the therapy, but just seeing where they're able to, even in the midst, I think the most powerful stories for me is where I see people, even in the midst of their anxiety, just really leaning into Jesus and leaning into the Lord and seeing how he carries them through that. And the ones that were just actively like, yes, God, I want you, and they're pursuing him, even when it feels so hard, it just comes out with such a powerful testimony. And he still works in the ones that aren't maybe that fervent, but it's like, okay, I still see benefits with that. But the biggest stories and the most exciting things is where I see how the Lord really used their anxiety and their weakness to help them develop that deep level of intimacy where they're just like powerful prayer warriors now and just really out there thriving, even though they still kind of deal with it from time to time. So those are exciting stories.
And it changes the whole family tree and the trajectory of the family dynamic.
Yes, absolutely.
Kimberly, do you have any closing thoughts that you had in mind? Anything on your heart that you wanted to share before we close?
Yes, I have a few things. I'm an entrepreneur, so I always have a million ideas and love to go after every single one. And sometimes I don't have time or it gets slowed down. But my book has been a work in progress for a while. It's called Peace Made Possible. And it's just basically it's a short read. It's only, I think it's 35,000 words is my goal. And I'm just about done with that final manuscript. And I'll be submitting that to be launched hopefully within the next couple of months or by the end of the year. I'm hoping my goal is to have it done by the end of August, but I keep on saying every month, like, oh, I should have it done this month. And you're like, oh, I think I'm actually getting closer. It's a process. It's my own experience with anxiety, but also my clinical expertise as well, and where I've seen like the main reasons why people deal with anxiety and the steps they can take to start to shift that or change that. I'm really excited to have that done soon.
Well, we have to hear about it as soon as it comes out, or put us on the wait list.
Oh, sure. Yes, I will keep you informed. And then I will probably be doing just a free Q&A for anyone who's interested in talking to a therapist or just kind of has some questions about like my kid's dealing with this and I want to know kind of general advice, like what would you do in this case? So I'm getting ready to post a webinar for that sometime in the next month where people can just join in, and it's basically it's not therapy, but like free time to talk to me and get my expertise and my knowledge in that limited way. And then I have plans. I think there's a huge need, I think, that I'm seeing, especially Christian women who want to get married and they don't know how to navigate the world of modern dating. And it's stressful and it's just a nightmare out there. But I'm like, I'm going to do some sort of class or webinar on how to navigate the world of modern dating as a Christian woman looking for a marriage partner.
Not hanging out at bars? No,
That could be the case. You never know. Because like sometimes Christians will be like, well, I'm not going to meet him at the grocery store. I'm like, well, you're a Christian and you go to the grocery store. So why don't we open our eyes and look around? You can talk to them and who knows. So if it's good to have like a level of openness, but also wisdom and discernment, how do we pair the two together? And I think a lot of people need help with that. So I'm excited to do that. So that's just lots of things in the works. I'm also going to be starting a teen anxiety group probably in September. So yeah, lots of things that are on my to-do list to get announced pretty soon here.
Well, we're definitely going to have to have you on a couple more times to really get into all, like, I'm just so excited to have connected with you and to have you on our show. We're just so blessed to have you on today. And I'm so excited for you and your book. We will put all of those links to sign up and the name of your book so everyone can keep an eye out for that. Please, if you could tell us how people can get connected with you, then I'll also put it in the description.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think the best way to find me is through my website. So it's www.claritychristian.com. And there's a little contact us tab you can click on. You fill out a little form. I do a free 15-minute phone consultation for anyone who's just interested in learning more about how I work and if I'd be a good fit for them as a therapist. And I have an FAQ page and everything, so you can do all your reading on there too if you have more questions about my practice, but that's probably the best way. You can also email me at kimberly@claritychristian.com. One more thing, I have a Facebook group that I started called Christian Women Overcoming Anxiety. And that is just, it's not specific to my practice, but just a place where women can come who experience anxiety, but also have faith in the Lord. And it's kind of a work in progress, but sharing encouragement and different mental health tips as well too. So if anyone wants to join that, I'd be happy to have them there.
Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Wow. I'm so impressed, and I'm just so glad that we had this opportunity today, and I'm hoping that this can help some people. And yeah, please feel free. If anyone has questions, please comment and reach out to us. We'll have Kimberly's contact information again down in the description if you'd like to connect with her. Thank you so much again, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.